The text message came through while I was doing my pre-flight inspection on a Gulfstream G650, preparing to fly 3 Fortune 500 CEOs to Monaco. Sarah, we're having a family intervention about your life choices this Sunday. You need to stop living in denial and get a real job. Love, Mom. I stared at my phone, then looked up at the sleek $70 million aircraft I'd be commanding for the next 8 hours, flying at 51,000 feet while earning more in a single trip than most people make in 6 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My family had been staging these so-called interventions for 3 years now, ever since I'd dropped out of law school to pursue what they called my aviation fantasy. They saw a daughter who'd thrown away a full scholarship to Columbia Law to become what they assumed was a struggling flight instructor at some dingy airport. They had no idea that Captain Patricia Chen was one of the youngest women to hold an airline transport pilot license with a private jet certification, commanding aircraft worth more than their entire neighborhood combined. The irony wasn't lost on me as I completed my walkaround inspection, checking the pristine exterior of an aircraft that cost more than my parents' house, their cars, and my brother's entire medical practice combined. My mother, Patricia Chen, had spent the last family dinner explaining to her book club friends how disappointed she was that her daughter was still playing around with those little planes, instead of following in the family tradition of prestigious careers. My father, Dr. Richard Chen, a respected cardiologist, would sigh deeply whenever anyone asked about his children's accomplishments. He'd beam about my brother Marcus, the neurosurgeon, and my sister Linda, the corporate lawyer, then mumble something about me finding my way eventually. What they didn't know was that I'd found my way to the pinnacle of aviation 3 years ago when Platinum Executive Airways hired me as their lead captain for ultra-high net worth clients. My annual salary was something I'd never mentioned, but it exceeded what most of their doctor friends made in their best years. The discretion required in my profession meant that my family's assumptions about my struggling career had gone uncorrected for far too long. The intervention text had come at particularly ironic timing. I was literally about to fly tech billionaire James Morrison, pharmaceutical heiress Victoria Blackstone, and oil magnate Robert Sterling to a climate summit where they'd be making decisions that would affect millions of people's lives. These weren't passengers who flew commercial or even first class on regular airlines. They paid premium rates for complete privacy, ultimate luxury, and, most importantly, a pilot they could trust with their lives and their secrets. My phone buzzed again with a group message in the Chen family chat. Marcus had chimed in with his typical condescension. "Sarah, Mom's right. You're 32 and still haven't established yourself in a real career. We're worried about your future." Linda added her own helpful commentary. "I can get you an interview at my firm. Entry-level paralegal position. It's not too late to get back on track." Entry-level paralegal. I almost laughed out loud as my co-pilot, Captain Rodriguez, approached with the final weather briefings. "Everything looking good for Monaco, Captain Chen?" he asked with the respect that came from knowing my reputation in the industry. I was known for handling the most demanding routes and the most high-profile clients with absolute professionalism. "Perfect conditions, Rodriguez. We'll have them there in comfort." I tucked my phone away and focused on the final preparations. In 2 hours, I'd be cruising over the Atlantic at nearly the speed of sound while my family sat in their suburban Dallas living room planning how to save me from my dead-end career. The passengers arrived in their usual convoy of black SUVs with tinted windows. James Morrison, whom Forbes had recently featured on their cover, greeted me with the familiarity of someone who'd flown with me dozens of times. "Captain Chen, always a pleasure. I trust you've seen the weather reports for the Mediterranean." Victoria Blackstone, elegant as always in her tailored Chanel suit, handed me a gift bag. "Just a little something for my trip to Switzerland. Thank you for getting me there safely last month." Even Robert Sterling, notorious for his demanding personality, showed me more respect than my own family had in years. These weren't just wealthy passengers. They were my regular clients who specifically requested me for their most important trips. They trusted me with their lives, their schedules, and their secrets in ways that had earned me a reputation throughout the private aviation industry. When Victoria needed to reach her dying father in London with only 4 hours' notice, she'd called my direct line. When James had to evacuate his family from a hurricane zone, he'd specifically asked for Captain Chen and no one else. When Robert needed to make an emergency business trip to Tokyo to prevent a hostile takeover, I'd rearranged my entire schedule to accommodate him. But to my family, I was still their disappointing daughter who had abandoned a promising legal career to play with airplanes. The intervention they'd planned for Sunday would undoubtedly involve another round of lectures about responsibility, settling down, and choosing a career with real stability. They'd probably bring up my cousins again, the ones who'd become accountants and engineers and are now buying houses and starting families while I was, in their words, gallivanting around in the sky. What they couldn't comprehend was that my career had already provided me with more financial stability than any of them had achieved. The penthouse apartment I owned in Manhattan, which they assumed I was renting with roommates, was purchased with cash 2 years ago. The beat-up Honda I drove when I visited them was actually a choice I made to avoid uncomfortable questions about how I could afford the Tesla and the BMW that sat in my private garage. The designer clothes in my closet, the investment portfolio that my financial advisor managed, the vacation home in Aspen that I'd never mentioned, all of these were the fruits of a career they considered a failure. The most frustrating part was their complete inability to understand what I actually did for a living. When they bothered to ask, which was rare, I'd try to explain that I flew private jets for corporate clients. They'd nod politely and then immediately start talking about when you decide to get serious about your future. They saw my work as an extended hobby, something I'd eventually outgrow once I came to my senses and pursued what they considered a legitimate profession. As I completed the final pre-flight checklist, I thought about the Sunday intervention awaiting me. My mother had already enlisted my aunts to help talk sense into me. My father had prepared statistics about job security in traditional careers. Marcus had researched entry-level positions at hospitals where I could start over in healthcare administration. Linda had drafted a 5-year plan for how I could transition into corporate law, starting with paralegal work and working my way up. None of them had ever asked about my current 5-year plan, which involved expanding into international routes, purchasing my own aircraft, and eventually starting my own charter company. They never knew that I'd already been approached by 3 major aviation companies with offers that would double my already substantial salary. They were so convinced of my failure that they never bothered to investigate my actual success. The tower cleared us for takeoff, and as the Gulfstream lifted off the runway with the smoothness that only comes from expertly maintained luxury aircraft, I realized that Sunday's intervention might be the moment for some long overdue revelations. My family was about to learn that their disappointing daughter had not only amounted to something, but had exceeded every measure of success they claimed to value. Sunday arrived with the predictable orchestration of a Chen family crisis management session. I pulled into my parents' driveway in my deliberately modest Honda, noting that Marcus had brought his new Porsche and Linda had arrived in her leased BMW. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I walked toward the house where my extended family had gathered to discuss my failures. My mother opened the door wearing her most concerned expression, the one she reserved for serious family matters. "Sarah, sweetheart, we're all here because we love you." Behind her, I could see the assembled tribunal, my father adjusting his reading glasses, Marcus checking his phone with the importance of a man whose time was valuable, Linda organizing papers like she was preparing for a court case, and my aunts, Helen and Grace, sitting with the satisfied expressions of women who'd raised successful children. "Please, sit down," my father said, gesturing to the chair they'd positioned in the center of the living room like some kind of defendant's seat. I settled into the chair, noting the irony that in 12 hours, I'd be back in the cockpit of a $70 million aircraft, while here I was being treated like a wayward teenager who needed guidance from adults who'd never left their suburban bubble. Marcus cured his breath and launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. "Sarah, you're incredibly smart. Your LSAT scores proved that. You had a full ride to Columbia Law, but somewhere along the way, you got distracted by this aviation thing, and now you're 32 with no real career prospects, no savings, no home ownership, no retirement plan."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Honey, it's wonderful to have hobbies, but at some point you need to think practically. What happens when you get older? What about health insurance? What about retirement? My health insurance was platinum level coverage through the pilots union. My retirement account was managed by the same financial firm that handled several of my passengers' portfolios. But explaining this would require revealing truths they weren't prepared to hear. My mother produced a folder thick with printouts and brochures. We've researched some options for you. There are accelerated nursing programs, administrative positions at hospitals, even entry-level opportunities at accounting firms. It's not too late to start over. Start over. The phrase hung in the air like a challenge. They wanted me to abandon a career where I commanded respect, earned substantial income, and found genuine fulfillment. To start over in fields that held no interest for me? What exactly do you think I do for a living? I asked, genuinely curious about their perceptions. Marcus answered confidently, You give flying lessons to rich people's kids and maybe occasionally fly small planes for local businesses. It's nice work if you can get it, but it's not sustainable long term. My father added, We know you've been struggling financially. You drive that old car. You never talk about buying a house. You don't take real vacations. We're worried about you. The old car was a choice. The house was a penthouse in Manhattan. The vacations were working trips to Monaco, Switzerland, and Dubai that they'd never believe if I told them. Linda opened her laptop and turned it toward me. I've actually found some promising opportunities. There's a paralegal position at Morrison's & Associates that starts at $55,000. With your education background, you could probably work your way up to law clerk within a year. Morrison & Associates. I almost choked on the irony. James Morrison, the tech billionaire whose private jet I piloted regularly, had mentioned his ex-wife's law firm several times. It was a mid-size corporate practice that handled routine business contracts in minor litigation. Linda thought a paralegal position there would be a step up for me. Or, Marcus continued consulting his own notes, there are several administrative positions at medical centers. Nothing too demanding, but steady work with good benefits. Dr. Patel at my hospital mentioned they need someone in their scheduling department. Scheduling department. They wanted me to go from navigating international airspace and managing million-dollar aircraft to scheduling appointments for suburban patients. Aunt Grace spoke up with the tone of someone delivering wisdom. Sarah, I know this feels overwhelming, but sometimes we have to accept that our dreams don't match reality. There's no shame in choosing stability over fantasy. Fantasy? My career was a fantasy to them, despite the fact that I earned more in a month than most of them made in a quarter. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it instinctively. It was from Victoria Blackstone. Captain Chen, emergency trip to London tomorrow morning. Family situation. Can you accommodate? I quickly typed back that I'd check the schedule and confirm within the hour. See, this is exactly what we're talking about, Linda said, having watched me check my phone. You're constantly on call, always waiting for the next small job. That's no way to build a career. If she only knew that Victoria's emergency trip would earn me more in a single day than her paralegal position would pay in a month. My mother leaned forward with her most gentle voice, the one she'd used when I was little and needed comfort after a disappointment. Sweetheart, we can see you're struggling with this conversation, but we love you too much to watch you waste your potential. You're brilliant, you're capable, and you deserve so much more than this uncertain lifestyle you've chosen. They saw my silence as acceptance of their assessment, but I was actually calculating the logistics of Victoria's London trip. Given the urgency, I'd probably need to file the flight plan tonight and arrange for expedited customs clearance on both ends. The complexity of coordinating international private aviation was something they couldn't even conceptualize. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. Look, I've even found some apartment listings in neighborhoods with good transit access. Nothing fancy, but clean and affordable. You could start fresh. build something stable. Affordable apartments? Transit access? They were planning a life of mediocrity for someone who owned a penthouse and drove luxury cars. My father stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room as he spoke. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Your mother and I won't be around forever. We need to know that you can take care of yourself. Right now, we don't see how this aviation hobby provides any real security for your future. Aviation hobby. The phrase stung more than they knew. My career wasn't a hobby. It was a calling that I'd pursued with the same dedication they'd shown in their own professional lives. The difference was that they'd chosen conventional paths that were easy for others to understand and respect. Aunt Helen nodded sagely. It's like when my daughter went through her artist phase in college. Eventually, she realized she needed something more practical and became a teacher. Best decision she ever made. Artist phase. They were comparing my highly skilled, well-compensated career to a college student's artistic experimentation. The intervention continued for another hour, with each family member taking turns expressing their concerns and offering solutions. They'd created spreadsheets comparing entry-level salaries in various fields. They'd researched continuing education programs. They'd even contacted friends who might be able to provide networking opportunities. Through it all, I sat quietly, realizing that the gap between their perceptions and my reality had grown so wide that simple explanations wouldn't bridge it. They needed something more dramatic, something that would shatter their assumptions completely. As the meeting wound down, my mother handed me a manila folder containing all their research and recommendations. Please, just promise me you'll think about what we've discussed. We're not trying to control your life, but we need to know you're making responsible choices. I took the folder, knowing it would go directly into my recycling bin. But I also made a decision that would change everything. It was time for my family to learn exactly who Captain Sarah Chen had become.
The opportunity for revelation came sooner than I'd expected. Tuesday morning, I was reviewing flight plans for a 3-day trip to Switzerland when my phone rang. It was my mother, and her voice carried that particular strain that meant family drama. Sarah, your Aunt Grace is in the hospital. She had a heart attack yesterday evening, and the doctors want to transfer her to that specialized cardiac center in Zurich, the one your father mentioned where they do those experimental procedures. Her voice cracked slightly. The insurance won't cover international medical transport, and we're looking at over $200,000 for a medical evacuation flight. I sat up straighter. How is she doing? Stable, but they say time is critical. The procedure she needs isn't available here, and every day we wait reduces her chances. My mother's voice carried the weight of helplessness that comes when money becomes the barrier between life and death. Have you contacted any medical transport services? We've called everyone. The fastest anyone can arrange is maybe a week, and that's if we can somehow come up with the money. Marcus is trying to arrange a loan against his practice. Linda's checking if her firm has any international medical contacts, but she trailed off, the impossibility of their situation hanging between us. I looked at my computer screen, where I'd been planning my route to Zurich for a completely different purpose. Mom, give me 2 hours. I need to make some calls. Sweetheart, I know you want to help, but this isn't something your flying instructor friends can handle. We need professional medical transport, international clearances, specialized equipment. Flying instructor friends. Even in crisis, their assumptions held firm. I hung up and immediately called Dr. Elizabeth Manning, the emergency medicine specialist who'd flown with me several times when her pharmaceutical consulting work required rapid international travel. Within 30 minutes, I'd arranged for a complete medical transport setup: ventilator, cardiac monitors, defibrillation equipment, and most importantly, Dr. Manning herself to serve as the attending physician during transport. Next, I contacted my operations manager at Platinum Executive Airways. Catherine, I need the G650 configured for medical transport. Departure tomorrow morning at 0800, destination Zurich. Family emergency. Within minutes, she'd confirmed that our aircraft could be modified for medical use and that all international clearances would be expedited. The Swiss Cardiac Center was another phone call away. Dr. Klaus Weber, whom I'd flown to medical conferences twice, personally guaranteed that Aunt Grace would be admitted immediately upon arrival and that their best surgical team would be on standby. By evening, everything was arranged. The total cost for the medical transport, the international cardiac procedure, and a week of recovery in Switzerland was being covered through a combination of professional courtesies, my personal connections, and frankly, my own financial contribution. What would have been impossible for my family to arrange in weeks, I'd coordinated in hours. I called my mother back. Everything's set. The medical transport leaves tomorrow at 8 a.m. Dr. Manning will be the attending physician, and Dr. Weber in Zurich is expecting Grace by evening. The procedure is scheduled for Thursday morning. Silence. Then, Sarah, what medical transport company did you find? It's complicated. Just bring Grace to the private aviation terminal at Dallas Love Field tomorrow morning. Terminal C, Hangar 12. Sweetheart, we can't afford this. The estimates we got were, It's handled, Mom. Just be there at 7:30. The next morning, I arrived at the hangar early to oversee the medical equipment installation. Dr. Manning was already there, reviewing Grace's medical files and coordinating with the Swiss team. The G650 gleamed in the morning light, its medical configuration invisible from the outside but comprehensive within. My family arrived in a convoy of cars, my father's medical training evident as he helped transfer Grace from the ambulance to our medical team. But I could see the confusion on their faces as they took in the pristine hangar, the luxury aircraft, and the level of professional coordination that surrounded them. Marcus was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Sarah, what exactly is this? This isn't a medical transport plane. This is a private jet, a really expensive private jet. My mother was staring at the aircraft with growing realization. The registration number, N847SA. Those are your initials. Before I could answer, Dr. Manning approached our group in her flight suit. Captain Chen, we're ready for departure. The patient is stable, and Dr. Weber confirmed that the surgical team in Zurich is prepared for immediate intervention upon our arrival. Captain Chen. The title hung in the air like a revelation. Linda's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. Captain, Sarah, what's going on here? I took a breath, knowing that this moment would change everything between us. I'm Captain Sarah Chen, lead pilot for Platinum Executive Airways. This is my aircraft, and Dr. Manning is one of several medical professionals I work with regularly for emergency transport situations. My father, despite his medical background, looked stunned. Your aircraft?
Technically, it belongs to the company, but I'm the primary pilot assigned to it. We handle ultra-high net worth clients, emergency medical transports, and time-critical business travel. The cost of this transport isn't being covered by insurance or loans. It's being covered by professional relationships I've built over years of flying medical professionals, pharmaceutical executives, and cardiac surgeons to conferences and emergencies just like this one. The reality was sinking in slowly. Marcus, still trying to process, asked, "But you're a flight instructor. You teach people to fly small planes." "No, Marcus. I'm an airline transport pilot with private jet certification. I command aircraft worth more than your medical practice. I earn more annually than most doctors. And the reason I've never corrected your assumptions is because the nature of my work requires discretion about my clients and my income." My mother was staring at the aircraft with new eyes. "The car you drive when you visit us?" Is a choice I make to avoid exactly this conversation. The penthouse in Manhattan, the investment portfolio, the vacation home in Aspen, all of that exists. I just never mentioned it because you'd already decided what my life looked like. Linda, ever the lawyer, was putting pieces together. The Morrison and Associates position I found for you, James Morrison, is one of my regular clients. I've flown him to board meetings, family emergencies, and business acquisitions across 4 continents. He knows me as Captain Chen, and he pays premium rates for my expertise and discretion. Dr. Manning approached again, this time addressing my family directly. "I hope you understand how fortunate Grace is. Captain Chen is one of the most respected pilots in private aviation. When she called yesterday requesting emergency medical transport coordination, I cleared my entire schedule.
The connections she's made, the reputation she's built, this is why your aunt is getting world-class cardiac care that would normally take months to arrange. Grace, conscious but weak, reached for my hand. Sarah, I had no idea. All these years, You thought I was failing because my success didn't look like what you expected success to look like. My father, his medical training helping him understand the complexity of what I'd arranged, shook his head slowly. The international medical clearances alone should have taken weeks. The specialist coordination, the aircraft configuration, the Swiss hospital admission. Sarah, this level of coordination requires connections that take years to build. It took 3 years to build the reputation that made yesterday possible. 3 years of you all assuming I was wasting my potential while I was actually exceeding every measure of success you claim to value. The boarding call came, and as we prepared to take Grace to Zurich, my mother grabbed my arm. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. You assumed, you judged, and you planned interventions based on those assumptions. You were so convinced of my failure that you never bothered to investigate my actual life. As we lifted off from Dallas, bound for Switzerland with the best cardiac surgeon in Europe waiting for our arrival, I realized that this wasn't just about saving Grace's life. It was about finally showing my family that their disappointing daughter hadn't just amounted to something, she'd exceeded their wildest expectations. The intervention they'd planned had been about saving me from my choices. Instead, my choices had ended up saving one of them. And for the first time in 3 years, they were beginning to understand that Captain Sarah Chen had been succeeding all along, just not in ways they'd been capable of recognizing. Grace's surgery was a complete success. Dr. Weber later told me it was one of the most complex cardiac procedures he'd performed, and the timing had been absolutely critical. Without the immediate transport and intervention, Grace might not have survived another week. The flight back to Dallas 3 weeks later was different. Grace was recovering beautifully, and my family had spent those weeks processing everything they'd learned about my actual life. The intervention folder my mother had given me was replaced by genuine questions about my career, my achievements, and the path I'd chosen. Marcus apologized first, during a private conversation in the hospital waiting room. I spent so much time assuming you needed my guidance that I never bothered to see what you'd actually accomplished. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm proud of you. Linda was characteristically direct in her apology. I researched everything after we got back: your salary range, the requirements for your certifications, the level of responsibility you handle. I had no idea. I actually printed out job descriptions for airline transport pilots and showed them to my partners. They were impressed. My parents struggled more with their realization. They'd spent 3 years worried about my future, planning solutions for problems that didn't exist, missing the actual success story that was happening right in front of them. My father finally admitted, "We failed you as parents in the most fundamental way. We stopped listening." The Chen family dynamics shifted permanently. No more interventions, no more unsolicited career advice, no more assumptions about my financial stability or life choices. Instead, they began asking questions, showing genuine interest in my work, and including me in family planning as an equal adult rather than a wayward child who needed guidance. 6 months later, when my parents planned their anniversary cruise, they asked if I could help with the travel arrangements. This time, I was included in every conversation, every decision, and every detail. My expertise was valued rather than dismissed, and my professional network was appreciated rather than ignored. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. They'd spent years trying to save me from a career they couldn't understand, only to discover that my career had positioned me to save one of them when it mattered most. Sometimes the biggest transformations happen at 51,000 feet, and sometimes they happen in hospital waiting rooms when families finally learn to see each other clearly. Grace recovered completely and now tells everyone about her niece, Captain Sarah Chen, who literally flew her to life-saving surgery. My family finally understands that success comes in many forms, and their daughter had been soaring all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.